Queen Louise of Sweden, born Alexandra Marie Irene Mountbatten on the 13th of July, 1889 at Schloss Heiligenberg, Seeheim-Jugenheim, in the Grand Duchy of Hesse. She was Queen of Sweden from the 29th of October, 1950 until her death in 1965 as the wife of King Gustaf VI Adolf. She was the daughter of Prince Louis of Battenberg and Princess Victoria of Hesse and by Rhine. Her mother Victoria was the eldest daughter of Louis IV, Grand Duke of Hesse and by Rhine, and Princess Alice of the United Kingdom, daughter of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Through her mother Louise was closely related to the ruling families of Britain as a great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria and of Russia as a niece of Empress Alexandra Fyodorova of Russia, wife of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Louise was a sister of Louis Mountbatten, 1st Earl Mountbatten of Burma, and of Princess Alice of Battenberg, who was the mother of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Her father was an admiral in the British Royal Navy, who renounced his German title during the First World War and anglicised his family name to Mountbatten at the behest of George V. He was then created the first Marquess of Milford Haven in the peerage of the United Kingdom. From 1917, therefore, his daughter was known as Lady Louise Mountbatten. Because of her father's work, the family moved around between different territories in the British Empire, such as Malta, but they returned often to the Heiligenberg outside Darmstadt, which they considered their holiday home, always retaining a residence in England. Louise often visited her great-grandmother Queen Victoria on the Isle of Wight with her mother during her childhood. The family is described as harmonious. The parents of Louise lived in a happy, loving relationship, not in an arranged marriage, and Louise was particularly close to her brother, with whom she corresponded until her death. Louise and her sister were educated by governesses, except for a brief period at Textus Girls' School in Darmstadt. In 1914, Louise and her mother visited the Russian Empire, and were invited to a trip down the Volga with their imperial relatives. During her visit, Louise noted the influence of Rasputin with concern. The trip was interrupted by the sudden outbreak of the First World War, and Louise's father telegraphed for them to return immediately. Louise's mother gave her jewelry to the Empress for safekeeping, and they left Russia by boat from Haapsalu in Estonia and travelled to neutral Sweden, paying for the trip with gold, as their money was suddenly not acceptable currency in Russia. They stayed in Sweden as guests of Crown Prince Gustav Adolf and Crown Princess Margaret, Louise's mother's cousin at Drottninghöl Palace, just one night before they returned to Great Britain. During the First World War, Louise was first active within the Soldiers and Sailors Families Association and the Smokes for Soldiers and Sailors, but she soon enlisted in the Red Cross for service as a nurse. She was active at a French military hospital in Nevis, and then at a war hospital at Palavis outside Montpellier, from March 1915 until July 1917. She was commended for her hard work, and was awarded the British War and Victory Medals, a medal from the British Red Cross. After the war, she was active in social work for the children in the slums of Battersea in London. 1909, Louise received a proposal from Manuel II of Portugal. Her granduncle, Edward VII, the British monarch, was in favour of the match, but Louise declined, as she wished to marry for love. At the age of 20, Louise became secretly engaged to Prince Christopher of Greece, but they were forced to give up their relationship for financial reasons. Shortly before World War I broke out, Louise fell in love with a man of whom her parents approved, but he was killed in the early days of the war. Later during the war, while she volunteered as a nurse in Nevis, she began a relationship with Alexander Stuart Hill, a Scottish artist living in Paris. Anticipating that her parents would be disappointed in her choice, Louise kept their engagement a secret. Eventually, she confided in her parents, who were understanding, and invited Stuart Hill for visits at Kent House twice. Lacking resources, the engaged couple agreed to postpone marriage until after the war. In 1918, however, Louise's father explained to her that Stuart Hill was most likely homosexual, and that a marriage with him was impossible. In 1923, Crown Prince Gustaf Adolf of Sweden, having been for 3 years the widower of Louise's mother's cousin Princess Margaret of Connaught, paid a visit to London and, to Louise's surprise, began to court her. Although as a young woman Louise had said that she would never marry a king or a widower, she accepted the proposal of a man destined to be both. However, under 1810 Swedish succession law, a prince of the Swedish royal house forfeited his right of succession to the throne if he, with or without the king's knowledge and consent, married a private Swedish or foreign man's daughter. Once the couple's engagement was announced, there were lively discussions in the media about whether the bride-to-be was constitutionally eligible to become Sweden's future queen. In response, the Swedish Foreign Ministry, citing the law in question, clarified the term a private Swedish or foreign man's daughter to mean he who did not belong to a sovereign family or to a family which, according to international practice, would be equal thereto, and announced that the Swedish government had requested the British government's explanation of Lady Louise Mountbatten's position in this respect. The ministry further announced that following the British government's reply to its inquiry and the subsequent investigation into the matter, it had been determined that the Crown Prince's choice of a future wife was in compliance with the succession law, thereby concluding debate on the imminent nuptials. On the 27th of October, 1923, Sweden and Britain's respective plenipotentiaries signed the treaty between Great Britain and Sweden for the marriage of Lady Louise Mountbatten with His Royal Highness Prince Gustaf Adolf, Crown Prince of Sweden. The treaty stated, in part, that the kings of the United Kingdom and Sweden, having judged it proper that an alliance should again be contracted between their respective royal houses by a marriage, have agreed upon and concluded the following articles, which articles declared that the marriage would be celebrated in London and duly authenticated, that the couple's financial settlements would be expressed in a separate marriage contract which was declared to be an integral part of the present treaty, and that the two nations' ratifications of the treaty would be exchanged in Stockholm, which formally occurred the 12th of November, 1923. On the 3rd of November, 1923, at age 34, Louise married Crown Prince Gustav Adolf, in the Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace in the presence of George V and members of both royal families. The marriage between Louise and Gustav Adolf was by all accounts a love match and described as very happy. She was also liked by her mother-in-law because of her friendly nature, although they seldom saw each other, as Queen Victoria spent most of her time in Italy. The fact that the Queen spent most of her time abroad meant that Louise took on many royal duties from the beginning, which was initially hard for her as she was at this point described as quite shy. After the Queen's death in 1930, Louise was officially the First Lady of the nation, expected to perform all the duties of a queen, 20 years before she actually became queen. This meant that Louise was to take over the protection of all the organizations and associations traditionally assigned to the Queen. She was made the protector of the Swedish Red Cross, Children's Hospital of Crown Princess Louise, Eugenia Home, Queen's Emergency Relief Committee, the Promoting of Diligence, Swedish Handicraft Society. As a former nurse, a fact she was proud to point out, Louise was interested in improving the working conditions for nurses. Louise's only child, a daughter, was stillborn on the 30th of May, 1925. In 1926 to 1927, the Crown Princely couple made an international trip around the world to benefit Swedish interests, which was described as a great success, especially the trip to the United States, during which they traveled across the nation from New York City to San Francisco. Public interest was high, and the couple acquired a reputation for being democratic, after having refused such formalities as greeting the guests at a reception sitting on thrones, which they had been invited to do at the reception of an American millionaire. In 1934–35, she made a similar trip with Gustav Adolf to Greece and around the Middle East and Africa, called the Orient Tour. In 1936, Louise attended the funeral of George V of the United Kingdom. During World War II, Louise was active in aid work within the Red Cross. She collected candles and other non-electric light sources for the needy during the campaign. Another contribution was the Crown Princess Gift Association for the Neutral Defence Forces, which provided the soldiers mobilized to guard the borders of neutral Sweden with gifts, normally socks, scarves, and caps knitted by contributors from all over the country. As a citizen of a neutral country, Louise was also able to act as a messenger between relatives and friends across warfaring borders. During the Finnish Winter War, Louise set up a home for Finnish war orphans at Ulriksdal Palace. In 1950, Louise became queen after her husband's accession to the throne. Louise is described as a true democrat at heart, and was therefore somewhat disturbed at being celebrated merely in her capacity of queen. Louise disliked the strict pre-World War I protocol at court, retained during her mother-in-law's era, and reformed it when she became queen, instituting new guidelines in 1954 which democratized many old customs. In 1962, she abolished the court presentations, replaced them with democratic ladies' lunches, to which she invited professional career women, a custom which was to continue under Princess Sibylla after her death. Louise also renovated and redecorated the interior of the royal palace in Stockholm. Louise was described as eccentric for royalty and temperamental. She could get very angry, but was said to possess a good heart, a great sense of humor, a sense of self-irony, and was able to distinguish between herself and her royal role. She could show her sympathies openly, and this was taken as a sign of her honesty. She would never avoid acknowledging her own mistakes. Queen Louise is described as a great lover and patriot of her new home country, and was often shocked by Swedish non-patriotic customs. She was a supporter of the political system and democracy in the form it had developed in Sweden, and stated her opinion to her relatives that no other political system than the Swedish one had created such a happy development for any nation. Queen Louise also admired Swedish nature and in particular Swedish women, because of what she considered their natural dignity regardless of class, and remarked that she had never seen a country with less vulgarity than Sweden. Queen Louise had several Pomeranian dogs which she would hide about her person when visiting abroad, which caused problems when traveling through customs. After having taken summer vacations with her husband in Italy every year, she always departed before he did to visit England prior to returning to Sweden. A popular story told of her alleges that Louise, after almost being hit by a bus in London, because she would often jaywalk, took to carrying a small card with the words, "I am the Queen of Sweden" printed on it, so that people would know who she was in case she was hit by a vehicle. In London, she often stayed at the Hyde Park Hotel, often crossing a heavily trafficked street there to shop, which prompted her note. In 1963, Louise accompanied her spouse on a state visit to France, where she made a great impression on President Charles de Gaulle. Queen Louise's last official engagement was the Nobel Prize dinner of 1964, during which no one noticed that she was in fact already ill. According to Queen Margaret II of Denmark, it was very difficult for Louise to fill the shoes of her husband's first wife. Margaret and Louise's other step-grandchildren all used the nicknameist for Louise because when little they could not say Aunt Louise properly. Louise responded good-naturedly by signing all her letters to them that way. Queen Louise died on the 7th of March, 1965 at St. Göran Hospital, in Stockholm, Sweden, following emergency surgery after a period of severe illness. Queen Louise is buried beside her husband and his first wife, Crown Princess Margaret, in the Royal Cemetery in Solna north of Stockholm.